According to Section 5.2, I have the authority to enter in case of visible smoke or hazardous odors, Colleen said, arms folded like she'd just delivered the final word of a sermon. You left that property vacant, Nathan. If something caught fire, the whole block— There was no smoke, I cut in, voice low. And the only thing your nose caught was a lie my AI camera recorded in full, audio included. Her face twitched. Not a lot, but enough. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. She recovered quick. Security footage can be misleading. If it's edited, it won't hold up. The board already— I designed the firmware myself, I said. The sensor pings live data to an independent cloud node. No edits, no gaps. And the timestamp syncs with your key fob entry. Colleen blinked. The smug evaporated. Her lips parted for a rebuttal, but nothing came out. Name's Nathan Hale, cybersecurity consultant, code auditor for smart grid systems. I don't pick fights, but I don't let people rewrite reality either, especially not on my sister's land. That house, Lena's house, still smells faintly like sandalwood and lemon balm. She lined the windows with those oils before chemo made her too tired to keep up with it. She passed 7 months ago. Didn't leave a will, just left it to me in every way that mattered. She died in that house, and I've kept it locked, preserved, waiting for probate to wrap. Because that place wasn't just hers. It was safe. Colleen walked in there like it was abandoned, like her power mattered more than our memory. And that wind chime on the porch, Lena made it in high school, painted it blue and white with our mom before she passed. That's not just decoration, that's legacy. That's ours. So, when Colleen claimed she smelled smoke and entered without knocking, without a warrant, without calling me, I knew it wasn't about fire. It was about control, and control is a game she's about to lose. Where are you watching from? I didn't raise my voice that morning, didn't even invite her inside my own home. Just held the HOA citation in one hand and the printed security log in the other. She kept glancing between them, like the words might change if she stared hard enough. The paper she handed me claimed I'd violated community safety guidelines by leaving unattended ignition materials in a non-occupied home. That was her excuse for entry, but I'd already reviewed the footage. She didn't flinch when she opened the front door, didn't sniff, didn't search. Just wandered in like she owned the place, touched the mantle, peeked into Lena's room, opened the pantry. She didn't find a hazard, she hunted for ammunition. I stepped out onto the porch, the same spot where Lena and I had sat the week before she passed. Her wind chime tapped, out a soft song in the morning breeze. I kept my back to it as I stared down Colleen and said, "You've got one shot to retract this and admit what you did was illegal trespass." Her chin rose. "Or what?" I smiled. "Or you'll find out what happens when someone with full data, logs, a forensic certification, and a hell of a lot of time decides to show the board what really happened." Because I wasn't just protecting a house. I was protecting the last space where Lena had control over anything. Her music still lived there, her sketches, the broken mugs she wouldn't throw out. And I wasn't about to let some overreaching HOA president stomp through it with dirty boots and half-truths. This wasn't going to be fast or loud. I'd seen enough power plays in tech to know the quiet ones cut the deepest. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, I said aloud as I walked back inside, closing the door behind me. And subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. Because Colleen thought she opened the door on a fire hazard. What she really did was step into a trap. I didn't waste time. As soon as I stepped back into my apartment, I locked the front door and pulled up the system logs on my laptop. The AI flagged Colleen's entry event as abnormal, specifically her pause inside Lena's bedroom, which lasted almost 2 minutes. The footage showed her standing still, just looking around, like she was trying to decide what might offend the HOA next. My stomach turned. That room had Lena's framed sketches on the wall. The dried flowers in the glass case hadn't moved since her funeral. Colleen wasn't assessing a threat. She was assessing what to weaponize. The worst part? She'd done this before. I didn't want to believe it at first. But once I opened the community discussion board archives, hidden behind a login only residents could access, I found more than one post flagged or deleted for board defamation, Threads from neighbors asking why citations were issued for things like unregistered patio furniture or unapproved curtain colors. Most ended with the same reply, a warning from the HOA to cease further discussion to avoid escalation. They'd silenced people, but they hadn't deleted the footprints. I scrolled through archived screenshots, finding an old post from a woman named Carla Jennings. 2 years ago, she claimed the HOA had entered her home during vacation, citing a possible gas leak. There was no leak, she'd written, only Colleen and her clipboard walking through my living room like it was a showroom. A moderator had locked the thread. That moderator, Mira Chandler, HOA secretary. I leaned back in my chair. My eyes landed on the camera footage still paused on Colleen's face, staring blankly at the room that used to hold my sister's laughter. I knew I wasn't the first, but if I played this right, I'd be the last. Colleen walked over. The next morning, I took a walk down to the community mailbox cluster. A couple residents were there already, Alan Rowe and Mrs. Diaz. Alan gave me a tight nod. We didn't know each other well, but we'd waved before. Retired contractor, spent his days patching fences and fixing minor things for the older residents. "She hit you too?" he asked. I looked up from the citation in my hand. "Colleen," he added. "Every spring, she finds someone new to make an example of. Last year it was me. Claimed my storage shed was 6 inches taller than the guidelines. Shed's been here since the 90s, but I didn't have the original permit, so..." He shrugged. "She fined me." I paid Mrs. Diaz chimed in, shaking her head. "She cited me for wind chimes, said they exceeded noise tolerance. It's a chime, Nathan, not a jet engine." I froze. "Did it happen to be blue and white?" She laughed. "Mine's red. But I heard about yours. Lena's right." I nodded. Mrs. Diaz's smile faded. "She was good to people, your sister. Never played politics, just kept to herself and helped with bake sales." "She was the only one who shoveled my steps when I had knee surgery," Alan added. The silence sat for a second too long. "You think she's building a case?" I asked quietly. "Colleen?" Mrs. Diaz sighed. "She doesn't need one. She just needs no one to fight back." Noted. I returned home, my fingers tapping against the railing as I climbed the porch steps. The wind chime swayed gently beside me, Lena's little storm catcher. It was quiet, harmless, and still Colleen had marked it in her complaint. They say some people seek power to fix things. Colleen sought power to feel taller than everyone else. "Where are you watching from?" I muttered under my breath as I sat down at my desk again. I wasn't just filing an appeal, I was assembling a timeline. Colleen had a pattern, a rhythm. Every few months, a new target. Always the quiet ones, the ones who wouldn't fight. And when the dust settled, the HOA had more authority, and the community had less trust. This wasn't about rules. It never was. It was about fear. And the thing about fear? It only works when people stay quiet. Colleen hadn't planned on me. She especially hadn't planned on a guy with a homegrown surveillance system, legal knowledge of digital admissibility, and a low tolerance for bullies with clipboards. I opened a new file, title, Briar Glen Board Overreach Timeline. The clock had started ticking. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening in the Briar Glen clubhouse, past the tennis courts and through a double-door entry that smelled like lemon cleaner and smug authority. I showed up early, citation in hand, and 2 printed screenshots from my AI camera feed tucked under my arm. The room was already half full, a few folding chairs in a loose semicircle. The board sat behind a long plastic table with a faux wood finish, Colleen centered like some HOA monarch in a polyester pantsuit. To her right sat Mira Chandler. Her posture was pristine, back straight, clipboard in her lap, not a hair out of place, but her eyes didn't move the same way as the rest of the board. When Colleen opened the meeting with her usual flat welcome, Mira barely lifted her head, just stared down at the clipboard like it had secrets she wasn't sure she wanted to read again. I waited. Colleen moved quickly through the agenda. Lawn complaints, solar panel variances, some neighbor's oversized garden gnome. Then, like clockwork, she cleared her throat and gestured toward the stack of violation notices beside her. "One item of serious concern," she said, glancing at me with a tilt of her chin. "Last week, in compliance with Section 5.2, I conducted an emergency wellness check at the Hale property after smelling smoke. A violation was issued." I stepped forward before she could continue. May I respond? Colleen stiffened. You're not on the agenda? Actually, Mira interrupted gently, eyes still low. Homeowners may respond to individual citations under Section 3.6 of procedural guidelines. Everyone turned. It was the first time I'd heard Mira's voice cut through the room. Colleen's mouth pressed into a thin line, but she nodded. Proceed, she muttered. I walked to the front, holding up the images. This footage was taken from my AI home surveillance system, time-stamped, audio-enabled. It shows Mrs. Durrett entering my late sister's home without knocking. No smoke, no signs of fire, no urgency, just trespassing. A soft rustle spread through the room. A few neighbors whispered. Mira shifted. I've reviewed the system logs and pulled environmental sensors for that window of time, I continued. Zero heat anomalies, no particulate spikes, no trace of combustion, which means her justification for entry, smoke, was fabricated. Colleen leaned forward. Mr. Hale, I'm not finished. That shut her up. I turned slightly, speaking to the neighbors now. My sister passed away 7 months ago. That home is in probate. I've preserved it exactly as she left it, quietly, respectfully, legally. And I'm not going to stand by while that memory is violated by someone playing sheriff with a master key. There was a long silence, then a cough, a shuffle of feet. And finally, Mira's hand trembled, just slightly, as she reached for her pen. Her grip on it tightened as she wrote something down. She wasn't looking at Colleen. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the middle distance like her mind had gone somewhere deeper. That's when I saw it, the flicker, not in her voice, but in her fingers. The way her heel tapped once beneath the table, the way her knuckles turned pale around the pen. She wasn't just listening, she was remembering something. Thank you, I said quietly, placing my screenshots on the board's table. I'll be submitting a formal dispute, and I've already secured legal counsel regarding unauthorized entry. Colleen didn't speak again. She couldn't. Not without drawing more attention to the fact that the evidence was already moving in the room, passing from eye to eye like wildfire. But Mira looked at me as I turned to leave, and for the first time since I'd walked in, she made direct eye contact, just for a second. But her eyes said everything. She knew something. She just hadn't decided what to do with it. Yet. I stepped out into the night air. The crickets chirped low. The wind chime on my phone's home screen display shimmered with motion capture overlay. I tapped the screen once, locking it. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. If you've ever watched someone hesitate before doing the right thing, you know what comes next. Hit subscribe to see what Mira does with the truth she's holding, and how one small crack in the board might be all we need to bring the whole thing down. 2 days after the board meeting, I got the formal escalation notice in the mail. Not an email, not a call, a printed envelope, folded sharp and smug, bearing the HOA seal like it was the state's own authority. Immediate fine. $1,200 for failure to mitigate structural hazards in a non-occupied property. The alleged hazard? A non-extinguished wax source near flammable fabric. They meant a candle, one that had never been lit. It sat on Lena's nightstand beside a folded quilt, untouched since she'd placed it there after her second chemo round. The camera footage confirmed it. No match, no flame, no spark. Just the same teal glass candle, half full, unburnt. I stared at the fine for a full minute before walking straight to my car. If Colleen wanted escalation, she'd get it. Not in shouting, not in threats, but in receipts. I pulled into the parking lot of my office complex and rode the elevator to the 10th floor. My badge buzzed me through the door into Hailtech Analytics, a small cybersecurity firm I'd co-founded 7 years back with 2 college friends. Now I work solo most days, consulting on IoT compliance, firmware loopholes, and digital forensics. Today, I wasn't billing a client. I was dissecting an abuser. I opened the raw system logs from the AI node embedded in Lena's hallway. Unlike traditional cameras, the node didn't just record, it analyzed. Movement signatures, environmental deltas, pattern prediction curves. I filtered by the time of Colleen's entry and mapped the heat differential. No spike, no trace, no combustion. I knew what I was doing. The system wasn't hobby grade. It was a beta firmware I'd written to catch false alarms in commercial fire suppression panels. It had caught something else instead. A liar with a master key. The click of each key brought clarity. The timeline was clean, the visuals sharp. The only haze in the footage was the daylight streaming in through the sheer bedroom curtains as Colleen wandered through, unbothered. Still, I needed more. I opened the HOA's bylaws PDF. I'd skimmed it weeks ago, but this time I went deeper, past the standard fence height rules and landscape uniformity. Section 8.1, paragraph 3, all emergency entry decisions must be documented within 24 hours and reviewed at the next board session. My phone buzzed. It was Alan. "Hey," he said. "Mind if I swing by later? Got something you should see." I paused. "Sure, everything okay?" "Nope," he said. "That's why I'm coming over." When I hung up, I stared at the section again. If the board hadn't reviewed the entry formally, or if Colleen had made the call without a vote, that was a direct violation. But more than that, it was pattern. This wasn't about candles, or smoke, or flame. It was about leverage. Colleen's real game was inventory. Enter under false pretense, note what could be spun as a violation, then find strategically until the homeowner folded or left. And because she never left evidence, because people deleted their cameras or didn't have them to begin with, she'd gotten away with it, until now. I grabbed a pen and marked the corner of the fine notice, then circled the date on my wall calendar, 10 days until the next formal board review. If Mira was going to speak, it would be then. But if not, I'd bring enough fire of my own. The doorbell rang later that evening. Alan stood on my porch holding a yellowed blueprint scroll and a manila folder. "Did some digging," he said. "This was from the county office, not the HOA. My old permits. Figured I'd request them after we talked." He handed over the folder. "I also pulled a neighbor's," he added. "Guy 2 streets over. Same issue, same violation. But his shed got approved. Know what the difference is?" "What?" "He donated to the HOA landscaping fund last year." I stared at him. He shrugged. "Don't like saying it, but the pattern's real." Pattern backed by proof. I stepped aside. "Come in." We had a find to dismantle. Alan sat across from me at the kitchen table, his old blueprint scroll unrolled beside my laptop. The faint smell of dust and ink filled the room as he tapped the paper with a blunt finger. "See that?" he said. "This shed's been approved since 1997, but Colleen cited me last year, claimed it violated height restrictions, said I couldn't produce the original permit." "You had it the whole time?" I asked. He nodded. "Didn't matter. She didn't want to see it, just wanted the fine paid." I'd heard enough. With Alan's permission, I scanned his blueprint and logged it into a folder I'd started building. Briar Glen. Pattern of overreach. Every violation had a common thread, either arbitrary enforcement or non-existent review. But it wasn't until I pulled the full camera footage from Lena's front room that the full picture started to form. I hadn't watched it closely the first time. I'd just looked for entry and exit. But now, with pattern in mind, I watched the details. The second she walked in, Colleen stopped at the bookshelf, tilted her head, pulled out a hardcover volume of Lena's art journal, the one she'd self-published 2 years before diagnosis. She didn't just trespass, she inspected. And then she took photos. I paused the feed. Her phone screen glared back at the camera lens. She'd angled it downward toward a corner of the living room where an antique incense burner rested, something Lena picked up in Marrakesh before she got sick. That burner was never used in the house, decorative only. Colleen had photographed it like it was evidence. A chill crawled up my spine. She was building a case, or pretending to intimidate me into silence, into compliance, into leaving the house too risky to keep. I clicked through the camera logs, isolating the exact moment her voice registered in the hallway node. The AI had flagged it. I hit play. "Just take a peek," Colleen's voice said. "She's not coming back anyway." I froze. She meant Lena, and Colleen hadn't said it with sympathy. It came out cold, matter of fact. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was targeting the grief she thought made me weak. I ran the clip again, this time isolating the waveform and capturing the audio file. The voice print was clear, undistorted. There were no other parties present, just her lie, digital gold. I pulled the waveform into my forensic toolset and authenticated the audio. No tampering, full integrity. The AI node backed it with sensor logs. No chemical traces, no thermal anomalies, no particulate spikes. There was no smoke, but now I had fire. Still, I needed to ensure this couldn't be dismissed as creative editing. So I pinged a colleague from my compliance circle, Tori, who'd worked with the county's legal tech team during an insurance fraud case last year. She answered within minutes. "Got a fun one for you," I said. "Uh-oh," she replied. "Is this a favor or a job?" "Let's call it civic tech activism." I sent the audio file, metadata, and 3 camera logs. Within 20 minutes, she messaged back, "Clean. Layered confirmation from 3 nodes is airtight. You could submit this to a court, let alone a homeowner board. Want me to write a declaration of authenticity?" I grinned. "Yes, make it boring and full of legal words." That night, I uploaded the full segment into my archive and locked the raw data behind a 2-factor firewall. Then, I backed it up to a separate drive and tucked it inside Lena's old sewing box. She'd always said that if something mattered, you protect it like it breathes. Now it did. The data had a pulse, and it was growing louder. As I shut the laptop, my phone vibrated with a text. "Mira, Chandler. Can we talk? Not at the clubhouse. Too visible." I stared at the screen. She knew something. She was ready to say it. And now I had the first real piece of evidence to make sure her voice couldn't be buried. Not this time. I met Mira at the far end of the Briar Glen Community Park just after sundown. She'd chosen the benches near the pond, away from the clubhouse lights and far from curious neighbors. It was quiet, just the slow ripple of water and the occasional chirp of crickets. She was already sitting when I got there, legs crossed tightly, fingers clutched around a reusable coffee cup like it was keeping her grounded. "You came," she said, voice low. "I almost didn't," I replied, taking a seat beside her, until I heard what Colleen said on the AI logs. Her head turned sharply, startled. "She spoke?" I nodded. "In Lena's hallway. Said, just take a peek. She's not coming back anyway." She knew my sister was gone. She knew it wasn't an emergency. Mira stared down into the cup. I figured she exaggerated, but I didn't think she'd go that far. I let the silence stretch. She broke it first. "Nathan, I need you to understand something. Colleen's been manipulating board policy for a long time, but she keeps us technically inside the rules. She never puts anything inflammatory in writing. It's all verbal, all shielded by concern for safety." "That ends now," I said quietly. "I have video, audio, thermal logs. Her entire justification is provably false. And this time, I'm not filing a complaint. I'm filing a motion." Her eyes widened. "You're triggering a board action?" Section 4.3 of the bylaws allows a resident to file a petition for member review if board conduct is suspected to violate procedural standards. I already have 2 other residents willing to sign, Alan and Mrs. Diaz. Mira let out a breath, shaky and sharp. "I'm not asking you to go public," I added. "Not yet. But I need to know, did Colleen file the emergency entry with the board within 24 hours, like she was supposed to?" Mira hesitated. The tension in her posture deepened. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim notebook. "She didn't," she whispered. "I timestamp every submission as they come in. That report never crossed my desk." She wrote it into the next meeting minutes retroactively. Said she forgot to file, but acted in good faith. My pulse thudded in my neck. "That's a procedural breach," I said. She nodded. "If it's proven, she can be suspended pending investigation, but no one's ever had enough to make it stick." I took out my phone, opened the synced file, and played the audio again. Low, just loud enough for her to hear Colleen's voice. Mira flinched when the sentence finished. "I can't ignore that," she said. "You don't have to stand alone," I told her. "You've been holding all of this in, trying to keep your hands clean while she drags your name through every vote. I don't need a hero. I just need the truth. And if you'll back this timeline when it's time, we can finally stop her." Mira didn't answer right away, but she didn't walk away either. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter but firmer. "Get me the official petition form. I'll make sure it's submitted correctly." As I stood to leave, she added, "Nathan?" I turned. "She's been planning something bigger. I don't know what yet, but she's been meeting off hours with a couple board members and referring to an occupancy policy revision. You need to move fast." I nodded once. Thank you. Back at home, I scanned every HOA email from the last 3 months, looking for language changes, anything about property access, enforcement authority, or absentee rules. The most recent bulletin had a line about streamlining safety inspections for non-primary residences. That wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just about Lena's house anymore. Colleen was laying the foundation for a policy that gave her unchecked access to every non-primary property in Briar Glen. And if that passed, no. AI system, no footage, no dispute, just a door she could walk through at will. I stared at the candle on Lena's nightstand, the one that started all of this. Unlit, untouched, still being used against me. She thought my grief made me easy to manipulate. She forgot I write code for a living. I don't chase ghosts. I trap them in patterns, timelines, and hard data. If you've ever had to turn grief into fuel just to defend what's rightfully yours, hit subscribe now. This isn't just a fight over policy. It's a fight for every homeowner who's been silenced. Stay tuned to see how we take the offense. Mira showed up at my door just after 9 the next morning, winded and pale, like she'd jogged halfway across the neighborhood. She clutched her tote bag against her chest like it might burst open if she let go. "I can't hold it anymore," she said. She's rewriting the minutes again, this time before the vote even happens. I stepped aside without a word. Whatever line Mira had been walking for the past year, Colleen had just pushed her off it. She dropped the tote onto my table and pulled out a slim black binder. No labels, no tabs. Just a quiet thud as she opened it and spread the pages. "She makes me draft them before we even meet," Mira said, flipping to a page marked Pending Minutes, October. "She gives me expected phrasing and says it's for consistency. But this one's different." She tapped a section titled Revised Access Protocols for Vacant and Inactive Residences. It authorized unannounced entry into any home deemed vacant or insufficiently monitored after 72 hours of inactivity, under Community Wellness Authority. There was no mention of board votes, no review timeline, just language so broad it could cover anything from a vacation to hospice care. "She's planning to pass this under administrative authority before the next resident session," Mira said. "Claims it's just an amendment clarification. Has it been circulated yet? She was supposed to email it to the board Monday, but I have her draft." I stared down at the page. This wasn't overreach, it was conquest. "She wants to normalize what she did to Lena's house," I said. "Retrofit it into the rules." Mira nodded. "She's testing the waters. If no one objects, she'll escalate. I've seen her do it with storage regulations, yard fines, even HOA budget reallocations." I pulled out my phone and opened the timeline folder I'd compiled, Colleen's entry audio, the metadata, Alan's permit copy, and now the pre-written policy minutes. "You said you timestamp all document submissions?" "Yes, everything submitted to the board gets logged on a central server." "Can you prove this wasn't submitted yet?" She reached back into the tote and handed me a flash drive. "That's the server log as of this morning." God, I wanted to hug her. "Drop a like if you've ever had to work with someone who finally broke their silence," I muttered, half to myself, half to the file upload bar crawling across my screen. Once the drive loaded, I opened the log and cross-checked the draft Mira had given me. No match on the server, not submitted, not logged. This wasn't policy. It was forgery. And I had the only copy. "I'm calling an emergency resident review," I said. "Section 4.3. I'll attach every file we have. If she tries to pass this unilaterally, we hit her with pre-evidence of intent to manipulate the vote." Mira exhaled slowly. "You'll need 3 signatures. I have Alan and Mrs. Diaz." She paused, then picked up my pen. "Make it 4. When she signed her name, it didn't shake. Not this time. I scanned the draft, time-stamped it, and added it to the evidence set. The board couldn't claim this was fabricated. Mira had access to the system, and the document carried Colleen's exact phrasing style. It would match her language in dozens of prior notes. But we needed more than authenticity. We needed clarity. I turned back to Mira. "Do you have the last 6 board meeting audio logs?" She hesitated. "Only the ones I saved to my personal archive. Colleen insists we don't waste time recording, unless it's budget season. Then we use what you have." She opened her phone and forwarded 3 audio files, all labeled with shorthand. August SECA, September MAN-D, October Draft Prep. I clicked play. Colleen's voice filled the room. Let's streamline the language. If they read too much into it, they'll start asking questions. Keep it soft, public health, safety, emotional burden. Those words are bulletproof. Mira flinched beside me. There it was, intent. A direct admission. That this wasn't about safety. It was about optics, about manipulating homeowners through language too vague to challenge. I looked up. This is enough, I said. We bring this to the next board session, and if she tries to rush the vote, we release everything. Mira straightened. I'll call in sick that day. You sure? I'd rather miss one meeting than spend another year lying for her. We didn't shake hands. We didn't need to. Because now, we weren't just resisting. We were preparing for war. The petition went out Monday morning. I'd pre-filled the resident review request under Section 4.3 and included every supporting document, the audio logs, Colleen's pre-drafted policy language, the flash drive log, showing no prior submission. I wrapped it all in a time-stamped digital packet and sent it to the official HOA board email, copying every member, including Colleen. I didn't wait for a reply. I wasn't looking for permission. I was putting them on notice. 3 hours later, Alan texted. Just saw it. Damn, you hit every nerve. Let me know if you want backup at the meeting. Mrs. Diaz emailed a simple thumbs-up gif, but Mira didn't respond. Not yet. She was probably waiting to see if Colleen would retaliate, if she'd call, pressure, or corner her into folding. She didn't know Mira had already burned the bridge the moment she handed me those audio logs. Now, it was about building the structure that would make the fall public. I opened a new file titled Meeting Playbook. Step 1, prove procedural fraud. Step 2, show intent. Step 3, force a vote of censure. Step 4, trigger Colleen's suspension under Section 5.4. It had to be airtight. HOA boards don't collapse from anger. They collapse from evidence. The kind of evidence that makes liability insurers nervous and neighbors start whispering over hedges. That afternoon, I drove out to the local print shop and ordered 10 clean copies of the entire packet. Audio transcripts, image stills from Colleen's unauthorized entry, and a forensic validation statement Tori had drafted for me. The guy behind the counter raised an eyebrow. HOA trouble? He asked. Something like that, I said. He handed me the finished packets in a thick folder. Hope you torch 'em. Oh, I would. Next, I visited the county recorder's office. Not because I needed records, but because I wanted to speak to the zoning compliance officer. A guy named Marcus Riley I'd consulted with a year ago on an unrelated data privacy project. He recognized me instantly. Still catching liars with code? Trying, I said. This time, it's my neighborhood. I laid out the short version, unauthorized entry, falsified justification, an HOA president inventing her own access policy without resident review. He leaned back. She touch anything related to county fire code? She claimed a candle was a hazard, I replied. But I have full thermal logs. 0 combustion, no fire risk. Good, he said. Because if she filed anything with our office citing fire concerns, that's jurisdictional overreach, not her call. My pulse picked up. Can you check? He scrolled through his desktop records, frowning slightly. After a minute, he turned the screen toward me. She made a soft inquiry last week. Didn't file a formal report, but she asked what procedures were required to designate a residence as community risk under our guidelines. And there's no such designation. I took a picture of the screen, with his permission, and thanked him before heading back to Briar Glen. Now I had something unexpected, a counter-pressure point. Colleen had been laying the groundwork for a policy built on a false framework, something that didn't legally exist. If she tried to name a fire hazard, the county would shut it down. Fast. I added the photo to my folder, labeled False County Basis, No Supporting Code. Back home, I reviewed the HOA bylaws again and highlighted the line I'd memorized but now needed to underline in triplicate. Any board member found to have unilaterally instituted enforcement policy outside voted consensus shall be subject to internal review and possible suspension. The next meeting wasn't just a formality anymore. It was a trial. The only question was whether Mira would speak, whether she'd sit silently with that clipboard or lift her voice when the weight of the room fell on her. I wasn't worried. She'd already crossed the line once, and this time she wouldn't be crossing alone. Because if you've ever faced someone who thinks the rules only apply when they benefit them, you'll want to see what happens when the rulebook fights back. By Thursday morning, everything was staged. 10 evidence packets, sealed, tabbed, and time-stamped, sat in my canvas briefcase. I'd even printed a spare for Mira, just in case she needed one to lean on when things got tense. Because tonight wouldn't be quiet, not anymore. I spent the day finalizing the timeline summary. 48 hours of AI data logs cross-referenced with HOA minutes, Mira's draft documents, Colleen's forged policy edits, and Marcus Riley's photo, confirming no such fire code designation existed. This wasn't a complaint. It was prosecution. I drove the neighborhood twice that afternoon, not for paranoia, just calibration. I wanted to see who was watching, who moved differently, who had that wary glance that said they knew something was coming. More than a few gave me nods. Alan was out watering his front lawn, with a smile I hadn't seen on him in weeks. Mira hadn't texted since she passed me the binder, but she didn't need to. Her silence felt strategic now, not fearful. Back at Lena's house, I parked in the driveway and sat on the porch swing for a while. The wind chime clinked softly beside me, its familiar metallic hush calming the static that buzzed in my chest. She would have hated this. Lena, the meetings, the politics, the paper trail, but she would have been proud I didn't walk away. That I didn't let her memory become just another name Colleen trampled under the HOA's false authority. I stood and walked inside. The house was as it always had been, quiet, held in time. I walked down the hall, past Lena's room, and placed the flash drive with the final backup inside her music box. Not for drama, just because that box had always been the safest thing in the house. At 6 sharp, I arrived at the Briar Glen clubhouse. The room buzzed louder than usual. Extra chairs had been pulled out. Even residents I hadn't seen in months were present, including Mrs. Dunley, the retired judge who usually avoided these meetings like poison ivy. Colleen sat at the center table, sharp as ever in her beige blazer and pearled necklace. But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes tonight. She saw me. She knew. Mira wasn't seated yet. I took a chair in the front row, dropped the evidence packet onto my lap, and waited. Every tick of the wall clock was a countdown. At 6:07, Mira walked in. She wore the same neutral gray blouse and carried the same clipboard, but everything else was different. She walked like a woman who'd made peace with the fallout. She didn't avoid Colleen's eye. She met it. "Call to order," Colleen said briskly. "Agenda distributed in advance. We'll begin with—" "Before the agenda begins," I interrupted, "I'm invoking Section 4.3 for resident-initiated board review." The room shifted. A few heads turned. One woman near the back actually gasped. Colleen's smile barely faltered. "You may submit a review in writing, Mr. Hale, but the board isn't required to accommodate it on short notice." I submitted it Monday at 9:02 a.m. to the official HOA board address. It was received by all board members, including yourself. Here are the copies for resident and board distribution. I stood and handed out the folders one by one. When I placed one in front of Colleen, her hand hesitated before she touched it. Her poker face was good, but not perfect. "Contained within," I said, "are time-stamped AI camera logs, audio of the alleged emergency entry, and the forensic report verifying no fire hazard was present. Also included are pre-written meeting minutes authored by President Durrett prior to board vote, and an audio recording of her instructing the board secretary to manipulate procedural language." Colleen opened the folder, and for the first time in weeks, didn't speak. Mira cleared her throat. "I can confirm the draft document was not submitted through official board channels. I was instructed to insert it after the fact. That instruction violated protocol. I am submitting a signed attestation to that effect." Her voice didn't shake. The room was dead silent. Drop a like if you've ever waited for someone to finally say the thing out loud that everyone else was too afraid to, I thought. The war had started weeks ago. Tonight was just the beginning of the reckoning. Colleen didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. That might not sound like much until you've watched a woman, used to controlling every word in the room, get publicly cornered by facts she can't twist. The tension inside the Briar Glen clubhouse thickened like a storm cloud. Papers didn't rustle. Phones didn't buzz. Even the air conditioner clicked off like it didn't want to interrupt. Then came the pivot. She straightened in her chair, smoothed the front of her blazer, and finally said, "Mr. Hale, we appreciate your detailed presentation, but I'd caution the community against drawing premature conclusions. These materials haven't been reviewed for context." I stepped forward. "You mean like the context where you entered a dead woman's house without a warrant or vote, fabricated a fire risk, and then tried to pass an access policy that would have made it legal after the fact?" A few quiet gasps rippled from the back row. "I'd like to motion for formal review under Section 5.4, I continued, "for procedural misconduct and willful manipulation of HOA authority." Alan raised his hand from the second row. "Seconded." Colleen's mouth pressed into a line so tight it might have drawn blood. Mira leaned into her mic. "The motion is recognized. We'll move to board discussion." Now came the pressure test. The 4 other board members, faces I barely knew beyond awkward waves and forgotten BBQs, looked from Colleen to Mira, then to me. They hadn't expected this. Not the documentation, not the audio, and certainly not one of their own standing beside the complaint. One of them, Mr. Ellery, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Durrett, did you provide these draft minutes prior to a board vote?" It was a formatting placeholder," Colleen said too fast. "We've done it that way before." Mira didn't flinch. She labeled it as finalized. "And the entry into the Hale property?" Ellery asked. She reached for deflection. "There was a concern raised by a neighbor about smoke. I acted with community safety in mind." "Do we have the name of that neighbor?" Mira asked, voice calm. Silence. "No formal complaint was filed," Colleen finally said, "but I stand by my decision." Mira's eyes stayed on her. "You stand by using a master key to enter a private home with no review, no visible hazard, and no board approval." "I had discretion under 5.2, Colleen snapped. "No, you didn't," I said, holding up the bylaw packet. "Because your entry was never filed within the required 24-hour window." Mira confirmed that. "And Section 5.2 only grants temporary authority pending post-incident review," which didn't happen. Colleen looked ready to spit glass. Mira turned to the rest of the board. "I recommend we accept the motion for formal review. We have corroborated evidence, violation of process, and an ongoing risk to the board's credibility." The room felt electric. Mrs. Dunley, the retired judge who never spoke, stood from the back. "You'd be wise to follow that recommendation. Any further delay may expose this association to liability." That was it. The board voted 4-1 in favor of the motion. Colleen was outnumbered on her own platform. A formal review was scheduled for the following week, but in practice, the suspension was immediate. Colleen couldn't vote, speak, or act on behalf of the HOA until the process resolved. Her gavel, her real, literal gavel, sat untouched on the table. When she rose, her jaw clenched, and for a moment, she looked right at me. "You think this changes anything?" she hissed under her breath. I smiled. "Number. I know it does." Outside, a small group had gathered, neighbors who hadn't attended a meeting in months. Some held their packets, others just stood quietly watching Colleen as she brushed past them without a word. Mira stepped out behind me, eyes steady. "You okay?" I asked. She exhaled. "I will be." Behind us, the wind rustled through the hedges. Colleen's reign had started with quiet citations and weaponized rules. The special board review was held in the town library's community auditorium, a neutral space big enough to seat twice the number of usual residents. Every chair was filled. People who hadn't shown up to a single meeting in years were now sitting up front, copies of my evidence packet in their laps. Some even had the time-stamped screenshots marked up with sticky notes. It didn't feel like a community gathering. It felt like a reckoning. Colleen was seated off to the side now. No gavel, no clipboard. Just a rigid expression and arms crossed like she was holding herself together with sheer spite. She wasn't allowed to speak tonight, only observe. Mira stood at the center podium, calm and focused. Her voice didn't waver as she called the meeting to order. "Tonight's session will focus on the review of board conduct regarding an unauthorized property entry and subsequent attempt to alter access policy language. All evidence has been distributed. Additional statements may be heard before the board votes on whether to proceed to censure or removal." The mic sat waiting. For a moment, no one moved. Then Alan stood. "I've lived here 19 years, he said, stepping to the mic, and I've paid my dues, fixed my own property, and stayed out of HOA business until I got fined for a shed that's been up longer than half the houses here. I paid because I thought it wasn't worth the trouble, but now I know that wasn't just me. This is a pattern, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. Applause broke out. Not loud, but real. Mrs. Diaz spoke next. I got cited for my wind chimes. I thought it was silly, but I let it go. I shouldn't have, because now I see it was never about noise. It was about seeing who wouldn't fight back. The third person who walked up stunned even me. Mrs. Dunley. I've watched this board for years, she said. Some overreach is normal in any small system, but manipulating minutes, forging policy drafts, entering homes under false pretenses, that isn't overreach. That's misconduct. And it puts this entire HOA at risk, legally and financially. Colleen flinched at that, because this wasn't just emotional now. It was exposure. I stepped up next. My sister passed away 7 months ago. That house is still in probate. I preserved it because it was all I had left of her. I didn't make noise. I didn't push back when they cited a flower pot. But when Colleen used her position to walk through my front door without consent, under a fabricated emergency, and tried to backfill a policy to justify it, I let the silence stretch. That's not community service. That's abuse of power. I tapped the packet on the podium. These aren't opinions. They're logs, audio, county records, recorded statements. And when one of your own, Mira Chandler, chose to step forward, she did it knowing exactly what it might cost her. That's what integrity looks like. Mira met my gaze, then turned to the board. We have 2 motions on the table, she said. One for formal censure, and one for full removal pending legal consultation. The board may vote on either. Mr. Ellery raised his hand. I moved to vote for removal. Seconded, came another voice, this time from the treasurer. No one spoke against it, not even Colleen. She didn't look at anyone, just stared at a spot on the wall as the vote was taken. 4-0. Mira took a quiet breath. Effective immediately, Colleen Durrett is removed from her position as HOA president. No applause this time, just a ripple of breath through the room, like a held exhale had finally been released. She stood slowly, her expression unreadable. When she passed my row, she didn't stop, didn't speak, but she glanced once, briefly, at Mira. I didn't know what passed between them in that look, but Mira didn't flinch. Outside, neighbors clustered in small groups, some shaking hands, others just quiet. The sky was clear, the wind soft. Mira stepped up beside me. You sure you're okay being the guy who toppled the HOA queen? I smiled. I'm not the one who made the first move. She smirked faintly. No, but you made the last one count. The first board meeting without Colleen opened with a quiet, nobody knew what to do with. There was no gavel slam, no clipped announcements, just Mira standing behind the folding table, eyes scanning the room with a clarity she hadn't carried before. She looked smaller up there, without the usual air of fear clinging to the space, but not weak, never that. More like someone who'd finally stopped pretending. She called the meeting to order. No preamble, no a ceremony, just a plain list of items that actually mattered, restoring fines that had been wrongfully issued, rewriting the emergency access clause with proper legal review, and, maybe most important, reaffirming the limits of HOA authority. Nobody interrupted, nobody smirked. It was the most productive 30 minutes this board had ever had. I sat near the back this time, didn't need to make noise anymore, didn't need to stand up and prove anything. The work had already spoken. Alan caught my eye across the room, nodded once. The kind of nod that said, it's over. But not just over in the courtroom sense, over in the way that power shifts and balance returns. Like a wound finally closed without infection. After the meeting, a few neighbors approached Mira with cautious smiles. One of them, Mr. Geller, brought his daughter and asked about volunteer sign-ups. I'd never even seen him at a board meeting before. And that's what stuck with me the most. Not the vote, not even the silence Colleen left behind. It was what bloomed in the space she used to fill. It was people showing up. That weekend, I returned to Lena's house. The probate had finally cleared, and I'd filed the paperwork to keep the house in the family, under my name for now. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it long term, rent it, restore it, maybe just sit on the porch sometimes and let the wind chime remind me she mattered here. I fixed the loose railing she always meant to get to, tightened the screen door latch, took down the warning notice the HOA had posted months ago, and burned it in the fire pit behind the garage. No ceremony, just ash and smoke curling into the sky, like a page finally turned. Inside, the house was still as she left it. But this time, it didn't feel frozen. It felt kept. There was something sacred about that. Not untouchable, just safe. When I checked the security dashboard, the nodes were quiet. No irregular pings, no flagged motion. It was the first time in months the logs had been blank. I left the front door open as I cleaned the entryway, letting the breeze move through. The wind chime played something soft, familiar, but different, like the house was breathing again. Mira texted later that day. Just a simple line. "We're rewriting the emergency protocol tomorrow. You want to help draft it?" I stared at the message a minute, not because I didn't know how to answer, but because part of me had already moved beyond revenge, beyond proof. The fight had never been about tearing someone down. It was about protecting what mattered, not just for me, for everyone. I replied, "Yeah, let's make sure no one else goes through what Lena did." That night, I sat on the porch until the sun dipped past the rooftops. The light turned gold, then soft gray. I didn't reach for my phone, didn't open the logs, just listened to the wind and remembered the sound of Lena laughing through the screen door. Not every victory looks like a crowd, cheering. Sometimes it looks like stillness returning where there used to be fear. Sometimes it sounds like a wind chime that finally rings without being watched. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a door no one gets to open without permission ever again. If you've ever fought to protect your home, your peace, or your family's memory, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Let's make sure they know we're not alone out here. Hit subscribe if you're ready for more stories where justice doesn't ask permission.